everything you think you know about Megalodon is probably wrong. If the image in your head is a great white shark scaled up to the size of a bus, a massive, stocky, torpedo-shaped killer with the same proportions as a modern great white just multiplied by 3, that image is wrong. It was not a great white shark. It was not even closely related to great white sharks. And the body shape that has appeared in every major documentary, every blockbuster film, and most museum reconstructions for the past 30 years has been contradicted by a growing body of research that paints a fundamentally different picture of what this animal actually was. Megalodon was not a scaled-up version of something familiar. It was its own thing entirely. A warm-blooded, hydrodynamically optimized, metabolically ravenous superpredator that required roughly 100,000 calories per day just to stay alive, dominated the world's oceans for nearly 20 million years, and then vanished so completely that the only things it left behind were teeth the size of a human hand and a mystery that science is only now beginning to solve. The real Megalodon is more interesting than the myth, and the real story of how it lived, what it actually looked like, what it ate, and why it died, is more compelling and more unsettling than any movie has ever made it. Because the lesson of Megalodon is not that the ocean once had a really big shark. The lesson is that even the most dominant, most powerful, most perfectly adapted predator on the planet can be destroyed. Not by a bigger predator, not by an asteroid, but by a world that simply and gradually stopped providing what it needed to survive. The first thing to understand is what Megalodon actually was, taxonomically, biologically, and in terms of where it sits on the evolutionary tree of sharks. Its formal name is Otodus megalodon. The name means big tooth, and it is perhaps the most accurately named animal in the entire fossil record, because teeth are essentially all we have. Megalodon, like all sharks, had a skeleton made primarily of cartilage, which almost never fossilizes. What does fossilize abundantly are the teeth, and Megalodon produced thousands of them over its lifetime, shedding and replacing them continuously in the manner of all sharks. These teeth are found on every continent except Antarctica, in marine sediments spanning roughly 20 million years. They are among the most commonly encountered marine vertebrate fossils on Earth, and they are immediately recognizable. Massive, triangular, finely serrated, and built to a design that screams predator even to someone with no training in paleontology. But teeth and a handful of vertebral centra are, for most practical purposes, the entire fossil record of this animal. Everything else, the skull, the fins, the soft tissue, the internal organs, is gone. Megalodon belongs to the family Otodontidae, not Lamnidae. That distinction matters enormously. Lamnidae is the family that contains the modern great white shark, the short-fin mako, and the porbeagle. For decades, Megalodon was classified as a close relative of the great white, sometimes even placed in the same genus, Carcharodon, and referred to in scientific literature as Carcharodon megalodon. That classification drove every aspect of how the animal was reconstructed, studied, and imagined. If you assume the two are closely related, you assume they share a body plan, a metabolic strategy, and an ecological role, and you build your entire picture of the extinct animal on the template of the living one. The problem is that the assumption was wrong. Molecular and morphological phylogenetic analyses now place Megalodon in a completely separate lineage. The megatooth sharks, a group that evolved independently from the great white's ancestors and diverged from them tens of millions of years ago. They are both lamniform sharks, members of the same order, but they are not close family. They are distant relatives that arrived at superficially similar ecological roles through convergent evolution, not shared ancestry. Understanding this separation is the key to understanding why almost everything you have been shown about Megalodon's body is a product of bad assumptions rather than bad science. And that brings us to the body, and to a scientific debate that has completely rewritten our image of this animal in just 3 years. In 2022, a major study led by Jack Cooper used the one reasonably complete vertebral column, known for Megalodon, a specimen discovered in Belgium, representing just the trunk section with both head and tail missing, combined with great white shark body proportions, CT scanning, and 3-dimensional modeling to produce the most detailed physical reconstruction ever attempted. That study estimated a body length of roughly 16 meters, about 52 feet, and depicted a stocky, massive, torpedo-shaped animal that looked, predictably, like an enormous great white. It estimated the animal could have swallowed prey the size of an entire killer whale in as few as 5 bites. The reconstruction made headlines worldwide, appeared in every major media outlet, and became the default image of Megalodon in popular consciousness. But in 2025, a study published in Paleontologia Electronica by Kenju Shimada and colleagues challenged that reconstruction at its foundation. The problem, the researchers argued, was the assumption that the great white shark is the correct body shape template for Megalodon. Using a much broader comparative dataset, encompassing not just great whites but a wide range of modern lamniform and non-lamniform sharks, the team found that larger sharks consistently tend toward more elongated, leaner body plans. A great white's stocky shape is efficient at its size, but at Megalodon scale, that same stockiness would generate enormous hydrodynamic drag, making sustained swimming energetically prohibitive. The physics do not scale. Instead, the 2025 study proposed that Megalodon's body was more like a giant lemon shark, longer, more cylindrical, with a less pronounced taper from midsection to tail, more whale-shaped than torpedo-shaped. The study also revised the estimated adult body length upward to as much as 24 meters, roughly 80 feet, longer than the fictional version in the 2018 blockbuster, The Meg, which depicted the shark at about 75 feet. The implications rippled through every aspect of Megalodon biology. A longer, leaner body changes the animal's swimming speed, its metabolic efficiency, its hunting strategy, and its energy budget. A stocky predator built for explosive bursts of speed hunts differently than a lean hydrodynamic cruiser built for efficient long-distance swimming. The revised Megalodon is less of a sprinter and more of a marathon predator. An animal that covered enormous distances at moderate speed, scanning vast stretches of ocean for concentrations of prey worth the effort of attacking. This is a recurring theme in Megalodon science. The assumptions that built our image of this animal were based on the wrong template, and every correction reveals something more sophisticated and more interesting than the movie version. What did the world look like when Megalodon was alive? The answer is warmer, richer, and more abundant with large prey than anything the modern ocean provides. Megalodon lived from roughly 23 million years ago to about 3.6 million years ago, a span covering most of the Miocene and extending into the early Pliocene. During the peak of the Miocene, global temperatures were several degrees warmer than today. The oceans were warmer at every latitude. Sea levels were significantly higher, and the productive continental shelf habitats, the shallow, nutrient-rich waters along the margins of every continent, where upwelling currents bring nutrients to the surface and sunlight drives photosynthesis, were vastly more extensive than they are now. Where modern coastlines drop steeply into deep water, Miocene coastlines often extended hundreds of kilometers of shallow sea across the continental platforms. These shelves supported an explosion of marine mammal diversity that has no modern equivalent. Whales were diversifying rapidly, both baleen whales, which were evolving larger body sizes as they refined their filter feeding strategies, and toothed whales, which were radiating into dozens of ecological niches. Dozens of seal and sea lion species hauled out on coastlines across every ocean basin. Dugongs and manatees, sirenians, the sea cows, grazed on vast meadows of seagrass in warm, shallow bays. Dolphins, porpoises, and their ancestors filled the mid-water column. The Miocene Ocean was, in terms of large marine mammal biomass, the richest the planet has ever known. For a giant predatory shark with a warm-blooded metabolism and a 100,000 calorie daily requirement, this was not just a hospitable environment. It was the only environment that could have produced and sustained such an animal in the first place. Megalodon did not evolve in spite of the Miocene Ocean. It evolved because of it. And Megalodon was built to exploit it with an efficiency that no cold-blooded animal could match. And its primary tools were teeth. Megalodon teeth are the animal's most abundant fossil. They are also, per unit, the most information-rich evidence we have. A single Megalodon tooth can be as large as 18 centimeters, 7 inches, roughly the size of an adult human hand. They are triangular, heavily serrated along both edges with fine, regularly spaced cutting notches and built for one purpose, slicing through flesh and bone with maximum efficiency. Unlike the piercing teeth of many predatory fish, which are designed to grip and hold, Megalodon teeth are cutting instruments. The serrations function like the edge of a steak knife, allowing the tooth to saw through dense tissue, blubber, muscle, bone, with each lateral movement of the head. A feeding Megalodon would not have bitten and held. It would have bitten, pulled its head to one side, and carved out a massive chunk of tissue in a single strike. Bite marks on fossilized whale bones confirm this. They show deep, wide gouges with parallel scoring marks consistent with a serrated cutting edge being dragged through bone. This is an animal designed not to subdue prey through constriction or drowning, but to inflict catastrophic tissue damage with each bite, removing so much mass so quickly that even a whale-sized target would weaken and die from blood loss and shock. And the engine driving those jaws was running hotter than any other shark in the ocean. In 2023, a landmark study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences provided the first direct geochemical evidence of what scientists had long suspected. Megalodon was warm-blooded, not fully endothermic like a mammal, but regionally endothermic, capable of elevating its body temperature significantly above the ambient water temperature through metabolic heat production. The study, led by researchers from multiple institutions including UCLA, DePaul University, and William Patterson University, analyzed clumped isotopes in the tooth enamel of fossilized Megalodon teeth and compared the results to teeth from modern sharks and contemporaneous fossil species. The technique works because the ratio of heavy to light oxygen and carbon isotopes in tooth enamel is temperature dependent. The mineral records the body temperature of the animal at the time the tooth was formed. The findings were striking. Megalodon maintained an average body temperature of approximately 27 degrees Celsius, roughly 80 degrees Fahrenheit, which was about 7 degrees Celsius warmer than the surrounding ocean water. That is warmer than any modern shark with regional endothermy, including the great white and the shortfin mako, which typically run between 22 and 26.6 degrees Celsius. 7 degrees does not sound like much, but in terms of physiological performance, it is transformative. Warm-bloodedness in sharks is not a passive trait. It is an active, metabolically expensive process in which heat generated by muscular activity during swimming is captured and retained in the body through elaborate countercurrent heat exchange systems. Networks of arteries and veins positioned so that warm outgoing blood heats incoming cold blood before it can cool the core. Maintaining these systems requires constant swimming and constant feeding. The benefit is enormous. Warmer muscles contract faster and more powerfully. Warmer digestive systems process food more quickly. Warmer brains process sensory information with greater speed, and a warm body can function at peak performance across a wider range of water temperatures than any cold-blooded competitor. For Megalodon, this meant speed in pursuit, stamina during long-distance migration, and the capacity to hunt effectively in cooler temperate waters that cold-blooded sharks of equivalent size simply could not tolerate. It could follow prey populations from the tropics into temperate latitudes, tracking seasonal migrations without losing metabolic performance. A warm-blooded shark the size of a whale is not merely a large predator, it is a mobile, endurance-capable, globally ranging hunting platform with no natural enemies. But warm-bloodedness comes at a staggering cost. Running hot requires fuel, constant, enormous, unrelenting quantities of fuel. Metabolic scaling models based on modern endothermic sharks suggest that an adult Megalodon may have required roughly 100,000 kilocalories per day just to maintain its elevated body temperature and sustain its basic metabolic functions. 100,000 calories. To put that in perspective, an adult human needs approximately 2,000 calories per day. Megalodon needed 50 times that. It is the caloric equivalent of consuming an entire adult sea lion every single day just to keep the engine running before accounting for growth, reproduction, or any burst of high-energy activity like attacking prey. For an animal with that kind of metabolic demand, food supply is not a luxury. It is an existential requirement. Miss a few days of adequate feeding, and the metabolic engine that makes you the apex predator of every ocean on Earth begins consuming your own tissues for fuel. And this is where the traditional image of Megalodon as a pure whale hunter starts to break down. For years, the assumption was straightforward. Megalodon was big, whales were big. Therefore, Megalodon ate whales. Bite marks on fossilized whale bones supported this narrative. Deep, gouging marks from serrated teeth that matched Megalodon's jaw profile have been found on whale vertebrae, rib bones, and flip elements across multiple continents and time periods. There is no question that Megalodon hunted whales. But was it only a whale specialist? A 2025 study published in Earth and Planetary Science Letters, led by Jeremy McCormack of Goethe University Frankfurt, answered that question definitively: no. Using zinc isotope analysis of 209 teeth from 19 different marine species, the largest trophic dataset ever assembled for Miocene marine vertebrates. The researchers reconstructed an entire food web from the early Miocene of southern Germany and placed Megalodon precisely within it. The zinc isotope signatures showed that Megalodon fed across multiple trophic levels, not just at the top. Its isotopic values confirmed apex predator status, but also revealed significant dietary breadth. It was consuming prey from several different rungs of the food chain, not exclusively targeting other top predators. The study's title captured the finding precisely. Megalodon was an opportunistic supercarnivore. When large marine mammals were available, it took them. When they were not, it took large fish, other sharks, sea turtles, sirenians, dolphins, anything with enough caloric density to justify the energy expenditure of an attack. This dietary flexibility was almost certainly essential. An animal that needs 100,000 calories every day cannot afford to specialize. If your only food source migrates seasonally or declines due to environmental change and you have no fallback, you starve. Megalodon appears to have solved this problem by eating everything at every trophic level, in whatever quantities were locally available. There were regional differences too. The isotope signatures varied between fossil sites, suggesting that Megalodon populations in different ocean basins may have specialized on different local prey depending on what was available. Whales in one region, large fish in another, marine mammals of various sizes in a third. This is exactly the pattern we see in modern large predatory sharks. Great whites in South Africa eat predominantly seals. Great whites in Australia eat more fish and rays. Great whites in the northeastern Pacific take a mix of pinnipeds, dolphins, and fish depending on season and location. Megalodon appears to have followed this same opportunistic blueprint, but at a scale that dwarfed anything alive today. So the picture of Megalodon that emerges from the last 5 years of research is radically different from the one that existed a decade ago. Not a giant great white shark, not a dedicated whale specialist, not a cold-blooded ambush predator lurking in shallow tropical waters. Instead, a warm-blooded, sleek, globally ranging, metabolically ravenous, opportunistic superpredator with a body more like a lemon shark than a great white, capable of sustaining cruising speeds across entire ocean basins, feeding on anything and everything worth catching, and burning through 100,000 calories a day to maintain the internal furnace that made all of it possible. This is not a simpler animal than the movie version. It is a far more complex and far more interesting one. And the story of its extinction is not a simple story either, because the very traits that made Megalodon the most powerful predator the ocean has ever known are the same traits that made it fundamentally incapable of surviving the world that came after the Miocene. So what killed the most powerful predator the ocean has ever produced? The answer is not simple, and that is precisely what makes it genuinely fascinating and genuinely relevant to the world we are living in right now. The answer is not simple, and that is part of what makes it genuinely fascinating and genuinely relevant to the modern world. Megalodon disappeared from the fossil record approximately 3.6 million years ago during the Pliocene. This was not a random event. It occurred during one of the most significant periods of global climate change in the Cenozoic, a sustained cooling that would eventually culminate in the Pleistocene ice ages. Temperatures were falling across the globe. The warm, productive Miocene oceans were cooling degree by degree. Sea levels were dropping as water was locked into expanding polar ice caps and continental glaciers, and the vast, shallow continental shelf habitats that had supported the enormous populations of marine mammals Megalodon depended on were shrinking, in some regions dramatically, As the shelves narrowed and the water above them cooled, entire categories of megalodon habitat disappeared. The warm coastal nursery areas where juvenile megalodon likely grew up, shallow, protected bays stocked with smaller prey and shielded from open ocean predators, were among the first casualties. Fossil evidence suggests megalodon used coastal nurseries in much the same way modern great whites and bull sharks do, and the loss of those nurseries would have crippled recruitment of new generations. The prey base was shifting too. As the oceans cooled, many of the warm-water marine mammal species that megalodon had depended on declined, migrated poleward, or went extinct. Baleen whales were evolving toward larger body sizes and colder water distributions, moving into polar feeding grounds that were too cold for a warm-blooded shark that relied on productive coastal waters. The menu was contracting, not all at once but progressively over millions of years. At the same time, a new competitor was arriving, and this is the part of the story that carries the most scientific weight and the most uncomfortable implications. The modern great white shark, Carcharodon carcharias, appeared in the fossil record during the early Pliocene and quickly established itself as a formidable predator of marine mammals. And in 2022, a study published in Nature Communications by McCormack, Shimada, Griffiths and colleagues delivered a finding that reframed the entire extinction narrative. The researchers analyzed zinc-stable isotope ratios in the teeth of 13 fossil megalodon specimens, 20 modern great white sharks, and dozens of other modern and fossil shark species from around the globe. Zinc isotopes serve as a proxy for trophic level. How far up the food chain an animal feeds? Animals at higher trophic levels accumulate lower ratios of zinc 66 to zinc 64 in their tooth enamel. By comparing these ratios across species and time periods, the researchers could reconstruct the relative position of each species in its food web. The result was remarkable. During the early Pliocene, the period when megalodon and great whites coexisted, the zinc isotope values of both species largely overlapped. They were feeding at essentially the same trophic level. They were hunting the same types of prey. This was not a case of a large predator and a small predator peacefully partitioning resources between them. It was direct dietary competition. A 20-meter, 100,000 calorie per day superpredator competing for the same food with a 6-meter predator that needed a fraction of those calories. And here is why the great white won. Not through combat. A 6-meter shark is not going to fight a 20-meter shark and survive. The great white won through efficiency. It was also endothermic, also fast, also capable of hunting marine mammals across a wide range of water temperatures. But it did all of this in a body that was a fraction of megalodon's size, with metabolic requirements that were proportionally a fraction of megalodon's demands. In a cooling ocean where productive coastal shelf habitats were shrinking and prey populations were declining, a predator that could sustain itself on smaller, more dispersed prey populations had a decisive survival advantage over a predator that needed a mountain of food every single day just to maintain body temperature. The great white did not outfight megalodon. It out-efficiented. It was the more viable animal in a contracting economy. The cruel irony of megalodon's extinction is that the very trait that made it dominant, its warm-bloodedness, was almost certainly a factor in its demise. Endothermy gave it speed, range, and power that cold-blooded sharks could never match, but it also locked it into a metabolic prison. When the food supply contracted, there was no way to turn down the furnace. A cold-blooded shark can slow its metabolism, reduce its caloric needs, and wait. A warm-blooded shark cannot. The engine runs hot, or it does not run at all. Research has shown that regional endothermy is associated with higher extinction risk among large-bodied marine species, especially when large prey becomes scarce. Megalodon's physiology, which had been its greatest advantage for 20 million years, became its fatal vulnerability the moment the environment shifted beneath it. The extinction was not instantaneous. It was not an asteroid or a volcanic eruption. It was the slow, grinding pressure of a world that no longer had room for the largest predator in it. Megalodon populations declined over several million years, contracting from their once global range into smaller, warmer refugia as the oceans cooled and the productive shelf habitats shrank. The fossil record shows a progressive reduction in geographic range and specimen frequency, leading up to the final disappearance around 3.6 million years ago. A 2019 study from the eastern North Pacific carefully dated Megalodon occurrences and found that reliable records become increasingly sparse after the early Pliocene, with the last confirmed specimens predating the major Pliocene cooling events. This was not a sudden catastrophe. It was a slow squeeze, a tightening vise of declining prey, shrinking habitat, rising competition, and inescapable metabolic demands, closing in over geological time until the last populations, likely isolated in the warmest, most productive remaining waters, could no longer sustain genetically viable breeding populations, and then they were gone. Not with a bang, with a long, slow diminishment into nothing. Now, about the myth. You cannot discuss Megalodon without addressing the persistent, stubbornly popular belief that it is still alive somewhere in the deep ocean. This idea has been promoted by Discovery Channel mockumentaries that were marketed as factual programming, by social media accounts with millions of followers posting fabricated images, and by a film franchise that has grossed over $1 billion worldwide. The appeal is visceral and obvious. The deep ocean is vast, it is poorly explored, and it is full of things we have not yet discovered. If anything could hide down there, surely it would be a giant shark. The emotional pull of that possibility is powerful. The science behind it is non-existent. Megalodon was a warm-water, coastal shelf predator. Everything we know about it, its fossil distribution concentrated in tropical and warm-temperate shallow marine deposits, its likely nursery habitats in protected coastal bays, the prey species it hunted, and its endothermic physiology, maintaining a body temperature of 27 degrees Celsius, points to an animal that lived in warm, productive, relatively shallow waters. These are precisely the waters that are most heavily studied, most frequently traversed by commercial shipping, most intensively fished, and most thoroughly monitored by modern oceanography, marine biology, and satellite surveillance. The deep ocean, by contrast, is cold, near freezing at abyssal depths, typically between 1 and 4 degrees Celsius. A warm-blooded shark, maintaining a 27-degree body temperature in water, that cold would face catastrophic heat loss across its entire body surface. The metabolic cost of maintaining that temperature differential over 20 degrees would be staggering, and there is nothing in the deep ocean to fuel it. The abyss is a nutritional desert compared to the productive surface waters and continental shelves. Biomass per unit volume in the deep ocean is orders of magnitude lower than in the coastal zone. An animal that needed 100,000 calories a day could not sustain itself in an environment where calories are measured in grams per square kilometer of seafloor. Beyond the physiology, there is the straightforward matter of evidence. Megalodon teeth are among the most commonly found marine fossils on Earth. They are composed of dense enameloid and dentine. They resist decomposition, they are immediately recognizable, and they wash up on beaches worldwide after eroding from exposed marine sediments. Fossil hunters find them regularly, but every megalodon tooth ever recovered, every single one, from every continent, from every ocean basin, comes from geological deposits that are at least 3.6 million years old. There are no megalodon teeth from the Pleistocene, none from the Holocene, none from any deposit younger than the mid-Pliocene. If Megalodon had survived into the last 3 million years, there would be teeth in younger sediments. If it had survived into the last 100,000 years, there would be teeth on the sea floor. If it were alive today, there would be teeth on beaches, bite marks on modern whale carcasses, sightings from the thousands of research vessels and fishing boats that operate in every ocean on the planet, and genetic material in environmental DNA surveys that routinely detect the presence of rare marine species from water samples. There is none of this. The fossil record, the physiology, the ecology, and the complete absence of any evidence whatsoever are all in agreement. Megalodon is extinct. It has been extinct for over 3.5 million years. The ocean is full of real wonders. A living megalodon is not one of them. What Megalodon leaves behind, instead, is a warning, and it is a warning that becomes more relevant with every degree the modern ocean warms, and every species of marine predator that slides toward the endangered list. The largest and most powerful predator the ocean has ever produced was not brought down by a single catastrophe. It was brought down by the same confluence of forces that threatens large marine predators today: gradual climate change that altered habitat availability, shifts in prey distribution that disrupted established food webs, competition from smaller and more efficient species, and a physiology so finely tuned to a specific set of environmental conditions that it had no capacity to adapt when those conditions changed. Megalodon's warm-bloodedness, its enormous size, its extraordinary caloric demands, these were not design flaws. They were adaptations that worked brilliantly, that made it the unchallenged apex predator of every ocean it swam in for roughly 20 million years. But those same traits left no margin for error. When the world changed, they changed from advantages into liabilities, and there was no evolutionary pathway out. Modern great white sharks, the very animals whose ancestors may have helped push Megalodon to extinction, now face their own version of this pressure. Warming oceans are shifting the distribution of the prey species great whites depend on. Coastal habitats are degrading under the combined weight of development, pollution, and overfishing. Bycatch in commercial fisheries kills an unknown but significant number of large sharks every year. The same metabolic traits that make great whites such effective predators, their endothermy, their large body size, their reliance on energy-dense marine mammal prey, also make them vulnerable to exactly the kind of slow, systemic ecological changes that killed Megalodon. They cannot simply switch to a different food source or move to a different habitat and maintain the same level of performance. Their physiology does not allow it. The parallel between the Megalodon extinction and the pressures facing modern marine apex predators is not a metaphor. It is a direct, mechanistically identical process playing out on a different timescale. Megalodon was not a monster. It was a machine, a metabolic engine of extraordinary sophistication, calibrated by tens of millions of years of evolution to dominate the richest, warmest, most productive oceans the planet has ever known. It ran hot. It ate everything. It ruled every ocean on Earth for longer than most animal lineages exist at all. And when the world changed, not overnight, not catastrophically, but slowly, degree by degree, species by species, calorie by calorie, it could not change with it. The furnace that powered 20 million years of uncontested dominance burned through the last of its fuel, and the greatest predator the ocean has ever known disappeared into the sediment, leaving nothing behind but teeth the size of a human hand, and a lesson that no amount of power can insulate a species from a world that no longer supports it. The ocean does not remember its kings. It just makes new ones. And then, eventually, it takes them too.